on TV, Zan. We got to do it right. Hurry, David. Right.
Go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming to tonight's conversation to debrief the trip that you all went on to Portland and Eugene and thereabouts. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Heather Bergman. I'm a facilitator with Peak Facilitation Group. I live and work in Broomfield. I do a fair amount of work for the city, but I don't live here. Nothing that you talk about today or decide to do in response to your trip will affect me personally. My job here today is make sure we talk about all the things that need talking about and do so in a constructive way and get through our agenda, because right at 6:30 a bunch of people are going to come through the doors to go to another meeting. So we want to make sure we stay on topic and get through things so that you can say all the things that need to be said before things get loud and unruly. If you saw the agenda or check it out now in front of you, what you'll see is we'll do a quick round of introductions. Maybe you all know each other, but we all don't know you, and I don't know you. So you'll tell us who you are and who you represent, so that'll give everyone a sense of where you're coming from. Some of you completed an online survey right after the trip, and I've compiled a 2-page summary of that. I want to stress that's a summary where I tried to look for like key themes or unique ideas just to give you a sense of what's in there. I do encourage you to look at the complete results because there's a lot more in there than what I was able to squeeze onto 2 pages. So we'll just review those so we all sort of have a general understanding of what's been said so far. And then we're going to look to you just to talk. And your job is to first identify, based on what you saw in your journey, what's Boulder already doing right? And then we can talk about what are some takeaways, what are some new ideas, some things that you're excited about on each of those 3 topics there, on homelessness, affordable housing, and on transit. And at the end, we really want to figure out what can council do, what can staff do to sort of move things forward. And that's always a challenging conversation, knowing that staff's already doing a whole lot and people are busy, and the council agenda, as I understand it, is full from now until 2055. But truly, we can provide some suggestions for next steps along those lines. If you're not at the table and you're in one of our observer seats, we're so delighted that you're here. We know everyone's busy, but we will ask you just to observe and not to participate in the conversation, but do feel free to check in with folks after the meeting to share your thoughts or ask questions of them at that time. So with that, let's do introductions. Again, if you would say who you are and who you represent so we all know about that. And Francis, you have to sneak in here in front. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Just because it was, just to maximize the awkwardness. But honestly, Francis, David was late first, so now you're just the second late one. It's all good now. And do use your loud and proud voices so folks in the observer seats and of course at home on TV eventually can hear who you are. And since I don't know you, would you mind starting?
I do not mind. I'm Isabel McDevitt. I'm with Bridge House, which is a homeless service agency here in Boulder.
Thank you.
I'm Brad Queen. I'm with the Environmental Advisory Board.
I'm Kurt Nordbeck. I'm a citizen. I grew up in Boulder. I'm a longtime Boulder resident, but currently living in Portland, and so I helped facilitate a little bit and give some tours in Portland.
I'm Karen Ron. I'm Director of Human Services for the city.
Is that actually on?
Yes.
Okay. It's on for TV and not on for us.
I'm Ann Getches. I tag along on the trip, but I'm on the Homeless Shelter Board, and I'm a property owner on the Pearl Street Mall.
Matt Applebaum on the City Council.
Andrew Shoemaker on the City Council.
Mike Homner with Boulder Rights Watch.
Robin Bohannon, Boulder County Community Services.
Ashley Prill of Boulder Channel 8.
Jane Brodigam, City Manager of Boulder.
Suzanne Jones, City Council.
Greg Harms, Boulder Shelter for the Homeless.
Katie McEldowney, Boulder Police Department.
Nikhil Mankakal, Human Relations Commission.
Peter Richards, longtime resident of University Hill. I wanted to go on the trip, so I paid my own way and came along.
Fantastic.
Mike Sweeney, Director of Public Works for Transportation.
Patty Malish, Neighborhood Representative for the Whittier neighborhood, downtown Boulder.
Aaron Brockett, Boulder City Council.
Francis Draper, Vice Chancellor for Strategic Relations with the University of Colorado Boulder.
Kurt Fernhaber, Deputy Director of Housing.
Brian Bowen, Planning Board.
Remember to use your outside voices, so the mic is misleading. It's only microphoning for them and not for them.
Gotcha. I'm Darren O'Connor. I'm with Boulder Rights Watch and about to be a Chancellor Scholar at DU Law School.
Nice. David Driscoll, Director for Housing, Planning, and Sustainability for the City of Boulder.
Dominic Nowzy, Transportation Advisory Board.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jan Burton on the City Council.
Jeremy Durham, Director of Real Estate Development, Boulder Housing Partners.
Fantastic. Do we get everyone? Okay. This mic is really unsatisfying to hold and to use because it does nothing for us here. And I don't need to be double mic'd because I already have one. Okay, so I'm going to. So if you just want to take a quick minute and pull out this handout, those of you, if you didn't get one on your way in, it's over by the snacks. When I copied and pasted all of your responses into my document, it was about 15 pages. So in the interest of providing a summary, I went through, and for each of the 3 substantive topics that you responded to on the survey, I tried to sort them into sort of 2 general categories. One was this idea of sort of concepts and general observations. Several of you had kind of global things to say, or process suggestions, or ways we should do things for each of these topics. And then more specifically, there were some tools, things that you saw on the trip that resonated with you either as a fantastic way that Boulder should go, or as a terrible idea that Boulder should definitely not do. And I tried to capture all of those here. Again, your overall response is much longer. Do look at those because people had more thoughts, more nuance than what's here. And I did not attempt to summarize your views on what was great about the trip and how the food was and what you wish was different and all those kinds of things. So just to call out a couple of things for you. On homelessness, what I saw several versions of in the survey was that you thought Boulder was generally doing a pretty good job, but there's a lot to do. You're not alone in the need to do it, and that everyone is really challenged by this by this issue. Heard a lot about needing to rethink our strategy, sort of as a general approach, and then below you see some specific approaches. On several topics, a lot of this idea of partnering things, that you can't just solve one of these problems kind of in a vacuum, that shelter needs to go with services needs to go with transit, otherwise you're sort of creating these silos of solutions that don't actually work together to get a comprehensive answer for folks. Lots of concern about the data that are not available. Why don't we have data? We should have data. Hard to solve problems without data. And then, okay, but what do we track? How do we track it? How does accurate? Sort of questions about that. Regarding the tools, again, I won't go through the litany here, but some different perspectives on the encampment that you saw. Some of you thought that was a really interesting idea that Boulder should explore. Others of you thought maybe not so much. Yep. People just said encampment, so yeah, thank you.
One was radically different than the other.
So we'll talk about that, and maybe one we all like and the other one we all don't like. That'd be fun to talk about. Thanks, Ann. This idea that the role of the nonprofit community is really an important one in making whatever you do successful, and wanting to make sure that we don't just look to the city to solve this, and look to the whole community as being part of the answer, and everyone leaning in to get a solution that works for everybody. One interesting thing that I called out here was just someone saying something that we never talk about in Boulder is this idea of storage of property. And that was a unique thing that you saw there that seems to be something that is a commonly viewed sort of gap here in the city. And then a lot of you really commented on this community engagement and the community conversation around homelessness, and how do you engage the community in an outreach type way, not just on the solutions, but also just sort of bringing it out of the darkness, making it something that we all talk about together and that we all can therefore solve together. Some of you thought that the city is coming up short on this. Others of you said doing good but could do better, but something to talk about there. Affordable housing. Again, this idea that things need to be linked together. You can't just do one thing. It's all pieces of a puzzle. Lots of interesting things that you saw out there, but then the question was, how do we create the city code to have the solutions that we want? How do we avoid unintended consequences? What really is the policy tool, the policy vehicle to get the outcomes that you're looking for here in Boulder? Again, the community conversation, some of you concerned that even if you get the community bought in on the front end on the concept and wanting to be part of the solution, people will resist solutions because it's different, it's not what we thought we were buying into when we bought into Boulder, it's not my Boulder, what have you, just some concerns about the community response. wanting to be bold, wanting to be decisive, wanting to be ahead and just really do something big because we're Boulder and we do big things here. Boulder planning and development has a PR problem. Too complicated. It sounds harder than it is. Sorry, David. Probably not the first time you've heard that. And so how do we solve that problem, again, as part of the community conversation? And then some of the tools, sounds like y'all saw a little bit of everything, your ADUs, your OAUs, your mobile services, and height restrictions and tax credits and all kinds of groovy stuff along those lines. In transit, there's a little bit more alignment here in terms of what you saw in the survey results. Obviously, land use and transit are connected. Density and transit are connected, and being more visionary, being big. Sounds like a streetcar, maybe, downtown Boulder. Some of you are very excited about that. Looking at this idea of sort of integrated planning and these boulevards and the special traffic lights and the bike rounds and the painted lines, just doing everything all at once to make it clear who goes where, giving a space, a safe space for everyone on the street. More transit options, more bus times. Some of you had really specific examples of, I would love to take the bus, but, and then here was your story about can't get there at the time I need to get there, only on Tuesdays, only when the moon is full, what have you. Concerns like that. BRT, bus rapid transit, you'd like to see more of it. You think that it can be better accommodated and integrated into the city, and are really excited about that, several of you. And then the streetcar to Boulder Junction would be cool. Don't know whose idea what that was, but that would be cool. And then better access into the neighborhoods. A lot of you saying need to look at these, the main corridors for transit. That seems like a good idea, and putting more residential in there. But we have all these people that live in these neighborhoods, and how do we get transit out there so those folks aren't just left hanging and required to be in cars to get anywhere and where they want to be. So those are some key themes. They're just the takeaways. Again, there's so much more, but just sort of to set the stage, thought we'd do a quick review of those. So now I'm done talking. Now it's your turn. Thought we could start a little bit with you saying what you saw that we're doing right. It's so easy to go somewhere else and say, oh, Paris, the bread is better, the cheese is better, the people are better, it's so fancy and so French, everything is not so great at home. But in fact, when you come home, you're like, oh, right, but there's the bathing here and so many great things about America. So let's start there with what's great here at home. What did you see out on your journey that made you realize what's going well here? I do need you to pass the mic. So that means you can't interrupt each other, because then no one will hear what your great thought was when you're interrupting. And it means you need to pause a moment while we get you a mic. So who wants to go first with the great thing that you saw that Boulder's already doing? Eeny, meeny, miny. Thank you, Andrew.
Are we any topic, or is it?
Any topic at this point. Free for all. Positivity knows no bounds, sir.
I thought that for the transitional and permanent approach to homeless solutions, Boulder seems to be doing a better job than the cities of Portland and Eugene, which was partially what is driving some of the policies there. Particularly Portland is behind. And even in the Eugene approach, the product we're providing is better. They're able to provide more product because of the land and various other types of things and willingness to do certain things, and there's a question of whether we can do some of that too to provide more volume. But in terms of the product, it seemed to me that Boulder is doing a better job than I think those other localities are doing.
Fantastic. Okay, who's next?
I didn't hear that one.
So we're going to ask you to do, again, your outside voices. There's an air conditioner over here that makes it very, very hard, so holla.
All right, yeah, I want to echo that we are doing a good job at working people through transitional housing, and the Ready to Work program, I think, is a brilliant opportunity for people who qualify. But I also think that we're doing a much better job, too, at criminalizing homelessness. We're putting a lot more people in jail, and that does have an effect of chilling people's feeling of welcome who live on the streets here. And if that's what we're going for, we're very successful at the moment.
You might have some ideas for things to do differently when we get to that. Other things that we're already doing right. Someone at this table, eeny, meeny, miny, someone. Thank you, Aaron.
So Portland has some amazing bike facilities, but one thing I felt like we do better here is our grade-separated bicycle facilities. So we have an amazing number of underpasses for the size of our city, and so a lot of the Portland bike infrastructure, you have to cross the street, contend with traffic, and you can go miles and miles and miles in this town on a bike without ever having any possible conflict with cars. So that was one thing I saw that we did better.
Fantastic. Okay. Who else? Matt? Oh, go ahead.
On the transportation side, I thought they have a lot of great diversity around the different options, but I thought what we are doing better is the EcoPass program, and I think they couldn't even talk about their fare structure very much when the question was asked, and so I think the EcoPass program is a really great start. I think we can expand it potentially, but clearly we're thinking more about affordability of the actual ride, whereas it didn't seem as that was as much of a theme there.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll say something about our affordable housing program, which I think is way ahead of where either of these two other cities are, both in numbers and in how long we've been doing it and our successes, even though everybody's got a long way to go. They've got some problems. They were only just allowed to do inclusionary housing, which we've been doing for a long, long time. But they have funding sources we don't have, so it kind of evens out, I suppose. But if you look at the numbers for a city our size, the number of permanently affordable units that we have is quite remarkable, especially when you think about the cost of housing here. In Boulder, if you're going to compare Boulder to Portland, you actually kind of have to compare Boulder not to the whole city of Portland, but to the central part of Portland, where things are really expensive. Because if you start getting on the outskirts of the city of Portland, well, that's a little unfair. We don't have those outskirts. We're much more compact. And so, again, long way to go. We should watch what they're doing. I don't know that Eugene's doing much at all, but we should certainly keep an eye on Portland. But Boulder has been doing this for decades, and we are way ahead of most.
Who else? Yep, Francis?
So I'll just comment from the university standpoint, since we did go to the University of Oregon in Eugene. And one of the things they said to us, which I think made us feel reasonably good about what we're doing here, is they came to Boulder in 2011 to a town gown conference at the university, and they found that we were doing a number of things that they've adopted in the last year or two. One of them is having an off-campus housing office that students go through, that monitor what's happening off campus, that go and visit the students early on in their transition to off-campus housing, and do collect your key programs where we train students on how to be a good neighbor. The second thing they've adopted that we've done for years is they apply the student code of conduct to wherever you go. As a student, it does not end at the university boundaries. So they've now adopted that. And thirdly, they've adopted a website for students to go onto with their PIN access to learn about housing off campus in a coordinated and consistent manner. So they were thanking us for having given them those ideas. So we were thinking, great, we're glad that we do those. We're trying to improve them. But it was nice to see that they felt those were worth mirroring.
Well, you're learning from them. They've already learned from you. Okay, how about some of our other nonprofit partners? Anything that you saw somewhere else that you thought's doing okay here? Because I'm going to ask city staff, but it's awkward for them. I sit there. Thank you. Okay, so, and then we'll go to Karen. Karen's going to be like, here's what I'm doing great. I'm awesome. That's what you should do.
Portland's doing a very good job with infill housing and making efficient use of their limited space. Better, I think, job than Boulder is, but they're not doing a very good job of managing the infill that goes in and some of the effects of it, including the scale and solar access and tree protection and some of those issues.
Can I infer that then you think that Boulder is doing those things better?
Yes,
infill
Boulder is
management?
definitely doing those better.
Okay, and scale, trees, and you had one more.
Solar.
Solar, thank you. Hi, Karen.
Hi.
So one thing that really stood out for me is regional partnerships and planning. So we are doing a lot of regional partnerships and planning around homelessness, particularly around kind of integrated assessment and housing. For example, in the 7-county metro Denver region, the 25 cities housing intake and assessment. And even our regional planning and countywide planning with our county partners around housing, launching the Consortium of Cities Permanent Supportive Housing Study, which will really help inform beyond the city of Boulder and across the county how we can address housing issues for the homeless and people in poverty. That and the partnerships that we're working on across the county and in the Metro Denver region, pretty significant. So that really stood out for me. I didn't see or hear a lot about more regional partnerships and bringing a regional perspective to problem solving as much. So I think we're doing a significant amount in that area.
Excellent. Other good things. The grass wasn't quite so much greener over there than it was here. Anything else? Yep. I'm going to run this back to Suzanne.
Okay, this may sound self-serving, but it's not. They have a crazy governance structure. So in other words, I think our governance structure we have, I know we complain a little bit about all the public process, but we have a lot of public engagement and access to elected officials. They have a system where they have one counselor that's assigned different topics. So if one counselor, for instance, is in charge of housing and is in charge of firing and hiring the housing director. So if you don't like what they're doing, it's hard to get access to that person and figure out how to change it. So I guess I would say that for all that, I'll just throw that out there I think for all that ours is sometimes, I don't want to say clumsy, but anyhow, our process is arduous. It is also, there's a lot of access to the decision-making process.
Okay. Okay.
So if I could also add,
yes.
I think we're doing better in partnerships around affordable housing. And I think that's, to add on to what Matt was saying, it's the inclusionary housing forces partnerships to happen, both private partnerships with private developers, also nonprofits, Boulder Housing Partners. It forces all development to be in partnership with the city as the affordable housing is developed.
Okay. Anyone else? Are we really excited to go forward? Oh, Jan's got one. No. Oh, you're waving at not me? Okay, fantastic. Okay, so always good to start on what we're doing right. So now let's move to our next agenda item. So what's your key learning? And your learning, thank you. Your learning can be, I learned that we don't want to do that. Or I learned that if we do that, we need to be mindful of these 3 considerations. Or I learned that that is the answer and we should get there as soon as humanly possible. So let's go in order of our topics. Let's spend a few minutes on transportation. What are some key learnings on transportation? Who's got one? Yep, hit me, dumb.
I think Eugene showed us that we could do really well in making the bus seem like a train. The BRT in Eugene is very impressive. It feels like a train experience. It's smooth. It looks like a train. You enter and exit like a train. I think that can be really useful if we think about some BRT applications here. The center median in Eugene, I think, was really pleasant and worked well.
Why do we want BRT to feel like a train? Just because it's cool, or it makes it feel?
It does seem more cool and hip. I mean, a big part of transit's problems is that it just doesn't seem very pleasant, and it doesn't seem very hip.
It's also easier.
Okay, so it's to get Okay, so it's improving the experience and just making it overall easier to access. Okay.
It's more efficient.
Efficient energy-wise? Oh, for getting people on and off and oot and a boot. Okay.
The other thing we heard over and over again, I think in Portland mostly, was that transit was really helping their population with affordability. not just affordable housing, but affordability overall. And I think we need to keep that in mind here in Boulder, that maintaining transit service and improving transit service can really help us achieve affordability goals.
Okay.
It also helps us with our current efforts to reform parking.
Mm-hmm. Like everyone's a winner there, right?
And it's going to be helpful for us to achieve more gentle infill.
Mm-hmm.
We heard both of those things from the Portland staff, that they're finding things easier because they have a lot of neighborhoods that are very accessible to good transit.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Mike.
So the thing that I took back was they had corridors where they had the light rail going through. I know that might not be possible by us, but we need to have that rapid transit going through our corridors. Not only just east and west, but also north and south. And I think if we can pick 2 or 3 main corridors and have buses constantly going on a regular basis. You know, like RTD on the Skip, during the main hours, they have an extra bus that runs tandem with it. And I think if we did that more on a regular basis, like they were doing, it seemed like, you know, every few minutes there was a bus somewhere, both in Portland and Eugene. And also they made sure that in Eugene, that where they had their rest stops and their opportunity village and such like that, they had stops there. You could catch the bus there.
So stops at
some of the stops at both the rest stops and Opportunity Village. The bus was accessible for people who did not have cars.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Rest stops are the homeless.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so two things. First, transit, because it came up. I mean, it's impossible to disagree with the fact that we saw some really cool transit, but the joys of being in a transportation district as Boulder is means that we don't get what we want or what we deserve, and we keep working on that. You know, we do keep working on bus rapid transit, especially in the eastern corridors, and I think what we should learn from it, given that we don't have a lot of clout with RTD, is at least make sure that we're creating the street network so that should we be able to get bus rapid transit, we can actually fit it in. Because the central loading is great and it is much more efficient, but unfortunately we don't hold the keys to everything that happens. And some of the other things, you know, the streetcar in Portland is fabulous. I remember thinking about a streetcar down Pearl Street 30 years ago. But how Portland did it was massive redevelopment on a scale that Boulder would never entertain, and then capturing the taxes from that. And we're talking massive redevelopment, tall buildings, the whole works. So I think anybody who goes there would come away with a better understanding of how transit really can work and the types of things we should be working towards, no question. But our context is very different, and we have to keep plugging away at it. The other thing I'd say real quickly is bicycles. I've seen this in other cities as well, not just in Portland by any means, but I do think we should take another hard look at, bicycle signals and painted paths, although we have snow and they don't, that's a problem. And better detection systems and better signaling systems, and also, given how few through streets we have, especially main streets, on Sunday morning we took a tour and we went down a kind of a neighborhood street that was set up to be the bike street with bike preference, and that wouldn't work everywhere in Boulder, but I think it's a really good idea, especially if you are trying to attract people who are not the kind of professional bike riders, but the everyday people. And if we can pull that off, it may take some jiggering with some of the street network and some of the signage and signaling, but you know, the streets we went down were great. And I've seen that elsewhere, and I don't think we do enough of it in Boulder. So that's something I came back with.
Okay. All right. Ooh, it's very exciting over here now. Okay. I'm going to let council people talk, and then I'm looking to people who are not on council. Have thoughts.
I just want to quickly second that piece of it. When we were riding around during the commute hour, we saw a lot of people commuting, and a lot of them were women, and it was clearly a cool and efficient way to get around. So I do think this whole notion of taking a more thorough look with our people at our grid system and see where we could add these bike boulevards to the neighborhoods, noting that they fixed the stop signs so the bikes get to keep going and the cars stop. There's roundabouts. They even put in, if there got to be too much traffic on one street, they'd put a barrier so that it would make the cars turn and the bikes could keep going. So it was clever ways to make it really inviting on neighborhood streets so that they became real corridors.
Okay. Can you pass that down to Aaron?
Well, just very briefly, I'll third that. That was, to me, that was the bike takeaway. I said how we do the grade separated better. This was something they did much better, which was the neighborhood greenways, which I think are something, I guess we'll get later to next steps, but I hope we can move on that. I think it's a great idea that could work well here in town. And talking about transit and building on some of what Matt was talking about, they are working with transit and development on a scale that we certainly can't approach here in Boulder. But the lesson that I took away from how they're approaching that is that they tie their transit and their land use together very closely. So those aren't separate silos. Oh, how do we zone this? Oh, where do we put a bus or a train line? They look at it as an integrated whole. And I think we can take that lesson away on our smaller scale with our shorter buildings and less intense transit, but still look at how we can integrate the transit that we have with the development potential that we have on some of our transit corridors or ones that we could develop in the future, with Arapahoe being a real potential example.
Okay.
Are you ready for not?
For what?
Not council?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always ready for not council. I mean, I love council. I love you, but please, not council. Go.
Well, first, I didn't go on the Eugene transit tour, so I don't know anything about Eugene. But in Portland, sort of tagging off of what he just said, one of the things that really stood out to me was the way that they tied transit to community building and quality of life. And so making sure that everybody was 5, 10, or 15 minutes away from easy transit, from restaurants, from coffee shops, right? And so they really sort of asked the community, what do you want in your community? Like, what would make your life easy without a car? Grocery stores, all of that stuff. And so they really reached out to the community and thought through that when they were mapping transit. And that sort of goes back into the one of the biggest takeaways, or the biggest takeaway in transportation for me from Portland, was the big picture thinking, right? 30 years down the road, 40 years down the road, and thinking about transit, not just in terms of triage or this surprise immediate need, that we weren't expecting last year, and now all of a sudden it's a big deal, but something that's like 30 or 40 years down the road, and thinking, what's this transit network, or what's this transit line going to look like? What do we need along the way? What are the people saying? And how does that then go back to these issues of land use? And then the other thing that I thought was really fascinating was how they went all in on this car-free downtown initiative. I was really, really sort of mesmerized by that, I guess is the word. And once again, thinking as a downtown resident, I mean, not just thinking personally how awesome that would be, but also thinking about, like, how does that tie back into transportation then? Like, if we're moving more of the tourist traffic away from downtown in a lot of different ways, how do we ensure that we have this, this bus rapid transit to make sure that then that if we go to this car-free downtown, we're still encouraging people to sort of cycle through.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, who's next? Hi, can you tell us who you are before you get going too?
Sure, I'm Jennifer Shriver. I got to go as one of the neighborhood representatives. One of the tagging along on Patty's thought, it reminded me of the bicycle corrals that are used, which I saw in Portland, which is a larger and more dense city. I think we saw a few of them in Eugene, but not as much. In Portland, they had bicycle corrals right in front of, instead of a car parking spot, and that businesses actually wanted them, because I know I've seen studies that people shopping by bicycle, you actually can get more sales, as surprising as that seems. But so businesses actually want these bicycle corrals right in front of their stores to replace a car spot, which just struck me as how different that is than how I'm normally thinking about it.
But apparently awesome.
But it seems to work, and they said they have a waiting list of businesses who want these. Really? They're really popular.
Oh, that's cool. Okay. Other thoughts? Yep, Kurt?
Also following up on something that Patty mentioned, to me, the most vibrant and exciting and appealing neighborhoods in Portland are very mixed in their use. It's this rich mixture of single-family houses and duplexes and triplexes and small apartment buildings and little corner stores and coffee shops and all this stuff mixed all together that we don't really have in most places in Boulder. And so if we can move further away from our exclusionary zoning approach, I think that would be beneficial.
Okay, excellent. Other thoughts? Yep, I'm here. Vanna, over to you. Peter?
I'll second what Kurt's saying because I visited Kurt and Krista in Portland a year and a half ago, and they lived in a much nicer neighborhood from my perspective than where they live now because they were very close to Reed College, which is a totally funky place. And to me, I think the issue is, I've lived on University Hill for a long time. The rents on University Hill are insane. Nothing lasts up there. And the rents in Portland are cheap. And there's this incredible vibrancy in all of the neighborhoods. I'm speaking specifically of the east side of the river, which is where Reed College is. And those were great. I was thinking, I'm ready to get out of Boulder.
Yeah, so one thing I noticed was just how walkable the city is and how that could benefit an aging population, which I didn't see a whole lot of old people out in Portland when I went out. But in this city, we have an aging population that needs to have its needs met with public transit, how walkable and safe the city is. And we've had some incidents recently that I just think we need to do some kind of community outreach to the aging population that may not be able to get to city council meetings easily. They may not use email to send them to council people. And so find some ways to get that input to benefit those people and include them in these transportation ideas. Because we saw a lot of stuff that looks, wow, that's so cool. And it's just seems like it's built for kind of young, hip people to use, which is nice, but that's not the population we have in Boulder. And we have an increasingly invisible aging population that I think we need to find out what needs they have and what we can do to benefit them on this issue.
Okay. All right. Andrew wants to go again. Anyone want to? No. I'll save for the next time. Okay. Who else?
I want to add some more.
Please.
The comments we heard just a little while ago about the bicycling, the quality of the bicycling. Portland's rightly recognized as being real bicycle mecca for a lot of things they do right for bicycling. But as a lifelong bicycle commuter, I've noticed that it's also true that in the downtown, I noticed that it was rather daunting. I felt kind of intimidated by the big size of roads, the big overpasses, and the big intersections. I felt unsafe. I felt not secure, and that would certainly be a problem for what we call the interested but concerned bicyclists in Boulder, that we need to be careful about facilities that can get too big and make it really feel daunting for people that are not used to bicycling in those kinds of conditions.
Well, I spent 2 days outside of the core city, downtown, and it's different out there. I didn't think that the transportation amenities were as good, and I did see a lot of old people, but I do agree there were little pockets of cafes and 2 or 3 cafes here and there, so that was very nice. But it's, I think we have the same issues here when you think about talking about the core downtown and then going, 5-10 minutes out. It's not, the issues are different.
There's Boulder and then there's Boulder.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyone else? Learnings on transportation? Yep, Zan? Nope. Okay. They've got
This might apply more broadly. but it's just part of their story is that they had some really progressive thinkers way back when that removed a freeway that went along their waterfront, and they decided it was more important to remove a freeway. I mean, that's kind of a big deal. It's kind of a big deal. That's part of their origin story, frankly. And I think it has the impact of making them think that big things are possible, that things don't have to be the way they are. They could be very different. They just also built a bridge across the river only for transit, bike, and ped. No cars. It's the Tillicum Crossing Bridge, which is kind of a radical sort of thing to do across the big river in town. Anyhow, so I think that colors their thoughts about what they might try, just because that's a part of their history, is that they have done really bold things. And I thought that was kind of a cool idea, that we shouldn't be tied.
What if?
Oh, what if?
What
yes.
if? Fantastic. Okay.
Yeah, as we're talking, a couple other things that come to mind, the bicycle signals, which I guess we have a couple of here in town as well, but that there were specific signals dedicated to bicycles, and they actually had the symbol of a little bicycle in the LED. I know we've had a couple of tragic incidents recently in Boulder, and so I'm feeling strongly about just protecting our bicycles and pedestrians, giving dedicated signal time, not having, I'm really concerned about our blinking yellow arrows, but it was cool in Portland. I noticed the confidence and ease that I felt, and some of them are even short bicycle signals. It could be awesome for places where more children could get to school by bicycle with a dedicated bicycle timing and that dedicated signal. And just also, I was talking to one of the people, I think in Eugene, after a presentation, and that their multimodal transportation is helping them meet their greenhouse gas goals, which, like us, they have really ambitious goals. And just seeing also the Alberta fires, I'm feeling the reality of climate change a little in our face, and how important it is to do everything we can.
Okay. Anyone else? Yep. Hi, Jan.
Just to tag on to what both of them said. First of all, the person who decided to take the highway out was the governor. And one of the things that I've felt very strongly was that they've had a lot more leadership than we have at the state level, which has really caused a lot of things interregionally between cities, and big decisions that have helped Portland. It wasn't made by the local government. It was made by state leadership that we really haven't seen. And that was with land use as well as transportation. Someone mentioned that already, that land use and transportation are tied together in most decisions. And the second thing that I was really struck by is there is there's politeness between drivers and bicyclists and pedestrians that I don't feel here. You can kind of pedal around downtown. They have set the speed limits downtown to 12 miles an hour, which is oddly enough what most people can ride a bike at. And you see people riding their bikes downtown kind of with cars. And I did that and didn't really feel that I was endangered. May have been a different experience than what you had, Dom. And then also the neighborhood greenways that other people have referenced. You know, the cars just stayed behind you, and then when it was time, they would pass you. But there wasn't this battle zone that it feels like there is in this city. So I don't know if there's some, kind of cultural stuff that we can do. And I've mentioned that to several people, and they say, well, their bike riders are different than ours.
Taller.
Well, maybe competitive racers. I don't know. Maybe our car drivers are different too. I don't know. But that was one observation that I had.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. Let's do one more and then we'll move on to our next topic.
I had sort of almost exactly the opposite experience. So I stayed an extra day to go out to the northeast and northwest to take a look outside of downtown. And I was with a friend who was driving. She just moved there from Boulder. And we were in one of those greenways, and a polite-ish bicyclists came up because she was accidentally in the greenway and sort of knocked on the window, and said, by the way, that's a $500 fine. You can't be there, and they'll really enforce that. And that ended up sponsoring a conversation in the car about like drivers are frightened of bicyclists in Portland. The bicyclists are very aggro. And what I found interesting and fun about that was that it felt different than everywhere else I've ever lived, right? Where sort of the drivers are are the ones that are cast as aggro and going to run over. And it seemed like the drivers had respect for bicyclists because they were a little frightened of them. Interesting. Yeah, like they were really sort of the bicyclists had some power here, and I think part of that then ultimately goes back to enforcement, because that talked a lot in the car. We talked a lot about how they really enforced those $500 fines, and they really enforced parking fines, and sort of like that level of automotive enforcement helped facilitate this really strong biking culture and respect for cyclists.
Excellent. All right. Let's make sure we save time for all of our topics and therefore move on to housing. Same question. What was your big housing learning or housing learnings, if that's even a thing I can say? I just said it, so there you have it. Housing learnings, what'd you learn? Let's pass that down to Kurt.
So I just want to add on to the culture. I thought it was very nice. When we were biking, we would stop in the middle of the road to look at a house for like 5 minutes and realize there was a car waiting for us. And then they would wave to us. So I thought that was very pleasant. But as far as housing, what I came away with is that Boulder is very segregated in how it's developed. You'll have big areas which are simply housing. And then you'll go to the grocery store, and it's this massive grocery store where we saw areas where things were different uses were more integrated. So as a bicyclist, you could ride 4 blocks to a smaller grocery store or to a coffee shop, or your uses and services were closer by and more integrated with the residential developments. And possibly that's something we need to think about in the city. Is that the type of environment that we built environment that might work? And I think it also integrates nicely with the transportation and allows people to ride their bikes. If they have to go 1.5 miles every time they need something, it makes it more challenging.
Okay. Other thoughts? Let's come back to Mike and then to Andrew. Give the mic to Mike.
I thought they did a really good job. We went to a planning session, and as he was stating, they actually planned the neighborhoods, and they wanted businesses there so you could walk to work, you could ride your bike wherever you want, and it was a self-contained neighborhood. I thought that was great, and I also thought that when they did their state of emergency for their housing, that became the #1 priority in the city of Portland. It made that the thing that they needed to work on. And I think that, at least from a perspective of somebody that's living here, I don't feel that. I know we hear it all the time, but I don't feel that we're doing that moving. We need to be bold. So.
Be bold. All right, if you pass that down to Andrew.
So we took a bike tour at Portland the early Wednesday morning, and saw some really charming neighborhoods with and up-and-coming neighborhoods, which we don't have in Boulder, because you've got sort of gentrifying neighborhoods, so to speak. But you're doing things with smaller lot sizes, with ADUs, and a lot of the concerns that you hear that might occur, like parking problems. We didn't see that, and in fact, it almost seemed like the streets had become more, were more vibrant. There were more families and things like that. But the challenge with that was that Portland has no university population, and that's the difficulty in Boulder. Eugene, in contrast, I thought was not nearly as charming as Portland from a neighborhood perspective, and from a walkability. They had the great train-feeling BRT, but other than that, it was very suburban in a lot of areas. The big grocery stores and all that. But they did do something that was interesting. It wasn't planned, but the economy was such that they had a lot of private student multifamily housing, dorm essentially managed apartments that had been created, and it actually was drawing students from the single-family neighborhoods into this product and opening up for workforce housing. And there's a question of whether in Boulder we might be able to incentivize some additional housing of that sort that might relieve some pressure on the neighborhoods and allow some of these other products along with freeing up some workforce housing. So,
Okay. Who's next?
Just following up on what Andrew said, I took a very similar bike tour on the Sunday, and there were some real pros and cons that Portland displayed. So I felt like there were some really valuable lessons in each direction. They had some great examples of the gentle infill that we talk about here, and I think in particular the accessory dwelling units. We saw several really great examples of putting in just a small carriage house on a lot that blended in really successfully, that I thought were really good examples. They also had some places where they were putting in duplexes on corners where it looked like one house any way you looked at it, which is a little bit harder to do here in town, but I thought it looked like it worked well if you could find a neighborhood that was interested in it here in Boulder. But then there were some counter examples I'll just mention from the same thing, that there was, like what Kurt said, they didn't do as good a job of paying attention to neighborhood character in some examples. So there were places where they'd just drop a 4 or 5 story apartment building right in the middle of a single family neighborhood, which I didn't think worked nearly as well and was a good kind of counter example. And then some others where some really enormous houses built on small lots where clearly they're missing the kind of compatible development regulations that we have here in town. So I thought there were some really great lessons of how to do gentle infill while, some counter examples of things to avoid at the same time.
So they're not perfect. Okay, well, that's good. What do you got?
So this is sort of a macro example or macro thought I had about this. Yeah, sorry, I guess the mic does kind of like make you talk quieter.
It makes you wrongly confident that you're being heard.
Right, yeah. Portland seemed to, and people can correct me if I have this wrong, have mandate that you can keep your growth boundary as long as you have a plan for accommodating the next 20 years of growth within it. So they had a target of, where do we come up with these 20,000 units over the next period of time? So they had a different kind of neighborhood buy-in that we do for letting these neighborhoods evolve and doing all this really clever stuff with, okay, you get ADUs, but you're also going to enhance maybe streetscapes, bike connectivity, walkability through inserting some awesome retail uses into neighborhoods. So there was a real upside, I think, to the neighborhoods for accepting those changes. And essentially the carrot and stick was sort of and if you don't, then we're going to have to start building out into what you think of currently as open space, because we need to increase our growth boundary in order to accommodate these other 20,000 people. So, Boulder has the growth boundary. We also, in our comp plan, do talk about that. How do we accommodate the next 20, 25 years worth of growth? But we don't actually talk about that. We talk about it really in terms of the 1% cap on residential unit growth. So I think they had a really different dynamic around that. And I think that led to actually better public buy-in on some of those things.
Okay.
So one of the things that just bubbled up for me was remembering that in Eugene we were talking about the town and gown issue, and they have a lot of great transportation that they've put in there. And I remember discussion of putting in more residences, high density residences in that area, but there was a concern raised that if you put that in and then aim that towards, for example, lower income families and such, that students who come in to Eugene, where they do have a college that can afford much higher cost of living, but who are attracted to the low cost of living and being near transit, could take that. And I think as a community, we could really be thinking about how to address affordable housing and some sort of income limits that keep that from happening. I personally don't mind having students as neighbors. I was a student. Many of us who came here and never left were those students. But I'm also sensitive to, if you've graduated and gotten a great engineering job at, say, Google, that you probably don't need to live in one of the lower cost rentals that are right next to a bus line that a family could benefit from. So I don't have the answers, nor do I think we should be discriminating against students versus others, but certainly by income and who we want in the community, it's a thought that we should be continuing to have.
Not really that much new to say. I think it'll be interesting to see where Portland goes with its housing efforts, because they do seem to want to build an awful lot of housing. I mean, they're frankly just much more into growth, both in the housing side and also in the economic and the job side than Boulder is or has been for 30 years now, probably. I'm not saying it's good or bad. They just, again, they're starting from a different place than we are in many ways. But, you know, they are really looking at, it's not just, it's really kind of our look at some gentle infill, but on steroids, where if they really do everything they say they might do, essentially any single family house in a neighborhood could turn into effectively a multifamily house with many families in it. And you know, they're more urban than we are. Certainly in the center part of town, they're way more urban than we are. I'm sure that drifts off as you get to the outskirts and it gets more suburban. But I think it's an interesting experiment to see, you know, will the community accept it when it gets to be more than just one or two, but lots? And also, do the impacts actually start building up? Even in Portland, do you have trouble with parking? Do you have trouble with some other things? I mean, even Portland backed off you don't have to have any parking anywhere regulation because they decided that went too far. And so I think it's a place to keep an eye on. And they will learn a lot, and I think we can learn from that as it rolls out.
Okay, excellent. Do you want to do one more thought, and then we'll move on to homelessness?
Quick follow-up. Portland did back off their policy of not requiring parking on high-frequency transit districts, close to high-frequency transit districts, but they backed off to a very low level. Like a third of a parking space per unit is the maximum, where, you know, that's 1/5 or something of what we often get. So it was a very mild back off. Also, just following up quickly on what Brian and Matt said, the conversation definitely is different there surrounding growth. And I think, as Brian was talking about, there's a very keen awareness that growth that they do not accept means sprawl. Mm-hmm. And in neighborhood meetings, you know, people grumble about, oh, well, I don't really like, you know, having this new development here and stuff, but I'd rather have it there than ripping up the wine orchards out in the Willamette Valley, the Tualatin Valley. Mm-hmm. And so there's definitely an awareness that the growth that they do not accept turns into sprawl, and I'm not sure that we always get that here.
Right. Okay. Remember, we still have homelessness.
No, it's an agreement, but it's getting back to something Jan said, which is, again, their statewide context is so different, where, you know, again, better or worse, it's got its implications, but, you know, as a state, they have these regulations that everybody has to abide by in terms of growth boundaries and sprawling to some extent, which helps limit it, and we don't have that. And so, you know, the cities in the Denver metro area can go on sprawling out to the ends of the earth and that has implications for all of us in the metro area. I'd be a little leery, frankly, of the Colorado State Legislature imposing something because it would probably be exactly the wrong thing.
Don't ask them for their help, or they'll give it to you.
Exactly. Don't ask them for their help. But nonetheless, you could see how over some decades that would change the context in which this city and other cities plan and grow. Mm-hmm. And that is very different in Oregon, and it's something to learn from, again, but I don't know how you'd retrofit that here.
Okay, we're going to go Jan and then Patty, then we're doing homelessness.
One thing that was interesting was, and we probably do this too, but I don't feel like the public has bought into it. The planning director said that everything in housing was guided by their climate plan, cutting carbon to 80% by 2050. And so they've tied all of their housing solutions into that. And somehow they've gotten their neighbors to buy into ideas of infill and things that we have not yet been able to do. And I'd love to get the neighborhood views on that. They also set goals, back to Mike's point. They have goals and numbers, and that ties down to specific programs like they, for example, cut development fees if a developer builds on a transit line and has a TDM plan. They have very specific things, so they have a goal, then they have actions that tie to those goals, and I think we could do that. And then one more observation that will get us into the homelessness. I felt like they looked at homelessness as a housing problem, not a social problem. And I feel like that is a very big difference where you're coming from. And our homelessness is always talked about in social services, not in housing. And I wonder if that's a paradigm shift that could help us in some way as a community.
Just really quick.
Yeah, sure.
So two things that haven't been brought up yet that were really key for me. One was that neither Portland or Eugene seemed really concerned at all about occupancy limits. Like that direct question was asked, and they're like, meh. You know, I can't remember which one had like a 6-person occupancy limit. The other one's like, we don't have any.
One's 5, one's 6.
Oh, okay. Oh, all right. One's 5, one's 6. But they seemed really non-concerned about that, especially if it was something like a structured cooperative housing program. The Hill students, I think, got a little more complicated, but they were pretty clear about being nonchalant in terms of broader perceptions of housing or occupancy limits. And then also, my takeaway, I'm not saying anything good or bad about Boulder in terms of this, but my takeaway from Portland was the importance of integrating affordable housing into market rate buildings and market rate neighborhoods. And I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. All right.
And just one quick one. So one thing I noticed when I walked through the city was that it's an aesthetically beautiful city. Mm-hmm. And it just taught me that I think sometimes in planning in Boulder, when we think about, we have such a good-looking, beautiful city, we're talking about the mountains and open space and less attention to building design. So I think we need to push better building design in the city. Because I was looking and I didn't see one of those kind of stacked boxes building designs that we seem to be getting so much of, that I don't know why we have so many of those, but I think the not as classic looking, and in not too long they'll be so dated, they're just going to look like old strip malls, and we'll have to knock them down and build something else. So
I really want to move on to homelessness.
So we can.
Yes.
Okay.
If anyone tries to talk about this after Andrew, though, I'm coming for you with a stick, and it's not going to be the microphone. All right, go.
I think the issue with that, in part, just having been on the planning board too, is that they have a different height limitation, I think, than we do, and so the boxes have to do with getting within your height limit. The other, and I can't help responding, is that on the Eugene College folks told us they actually knock on doors there and ask how many people are living in houses. So that's a difference, something we don't do. Yeah.
So many more fun things to talk about, but now let's talk about homelessness and what we learned. Who wants to start with a big aha about homelessness? Did I rush you through the last one because we have nothing to say on this one? Okay, I thought there'd be someone. All right, and then pass it to Mike when you're done.
I gave the pregnant pause to see if anyone else wanted to start, but I was so excited to go on this trip. I want to express my gratitude to the city for sponsoring Mike Homner and I to go. In Eugene in particular, meeting with the mayor and city council members, they were so engaged with the activist community, and I think probably people who've been following this story heard that they had Occupy Medical, which turned into providing free medical care in the city, and once a week, and that was really partnership between the city and people who were considered part of Occupy, which I haven't seen much of that happen just about anywhere else. So that was really nice. I talked to one of what I thought would have been the more conservative council women from Eugene, and when I engaged with her, asking, probing questions about the activists and how they got started with Opportunity Village, which houses 40 people there in tiny homes. I think the first words out of her mouth was, I love activists. They make this a better place. They challenge us to do better. The mayor herself down there said that she came from an activist background. So I think that sets the frame for me, really, of how they have succeeded in some areas where we definitely have some room to grow. I'm not sure everyone on our city council would say, I love the activists here, at least not the activists who are working on this particular issue. We are debating back and forth over how we can best serve a population that is very difficult to serve. I think in Eugene, we saw that it was still a challenge. They have a lot of really creative ways that they've embraced, and yet, no one there would say that we've got it licked. That no one has it licked.
Okay, and pass it back to Mike.
Okay, I just want to say one other thing, though, is that here I've been hearing that we're doing a better job because we provide actual housing for people, but our shelter, for example, just closed. Boho just closed. I know people on the streets. I can't tell them anywhere to go. I met a pregnant woman just on Sunday this weekend. I have nowhere to offer her to go. I have another family with kids, nowhere to go. They're in a domestic violence shelter, and come the end of school, they will have nowhere to go. That is the reality in Boulder. And so when we say, well, yeah, we're doing a good job, nowhere to go for homeless mothers and children and pregnant women, I think we can do a lot better.
So my takeaway was, for both cities out there, they were progressive cities. And we call ourselves a progressive city, but they're doing actionable things to be progressive. They're inclusive. When the mayor from Portland was talking, he was talking about everybody from the very wealthy to those on the street. And he cared about that. There was a compassion there that really I didn't expect, but there was. I think they were more open to outside the box, looking at different things, such as the rest stops in Eugene and the Opportunity Village that we saw in Eugene. You guys didn't go, but Darren and I went to the Dignity Village in Portland. And we saw, when we walked into there, I felt calm. And I think a lot of people think when they come around homeless people, there's a stigma that something's going to happen, something bad. And there wasn't. There was a calm about it. All those places, too, were not permanent. They were all voted on year after year by the council. We saw, and also I found that the police department, what I did was, when the tour went around with Opportunity Village, Darren and I actually went the day before. I sat back and I talked to the police officer there, and I asked him, I said, so, what did you think? What do you think what you're doing here? And he says, we were all hesitant, but after it started going, we had less calls to that particular Opportunity Village or to the rest stops than we do to regular neighborhoods. We had more calls. And he said the biggest call they had was domestic violence. A couple getting into a fight. They also had a team that they actually called in Eugene when there was a problem in one of these rest stops or Opportunity Villages. They went there first, and 9 times out of 10, it was, handled easily. So I know other people have to talk.
Yeah, all right, I'm gonna hustle this over to Isabel, and who's up next? Okay, and Greg.
Yeah, so I think, the big takeaway for me was that there is no magic bullet. But what I will say is I feel like particularly in Eugene, there was a level of willingness to, really bring a lot of folks together and everyone brings something to the table. And I don't think that that's that different in Boulder. I think we've just, haven't necessarily had as coordinated of a conversation as we should. I will say that the opportunities in Eugene, in particular around land, are just very different than ours. What I saw at the rest stops and at Opportunity Village was not all that different than some of the things we've done here. We just haven't done them as much, but I think we're headed in that direction. The programs that we saw were programs. They were not campsites, and I think that was really telling because, from a provider perspective, without having any kind of criteria, it's really hard to, manage something effectively to meet the needs of all stakeholders. I thought all the residents there were speaking about community and building community and having ownership over their where they were living. I think that the architecture of it would need to be examined just for our climate. But again, I think we're doing some of these things with more transitional type programming. I think we can expand them to different types of populations with different types of needs, but maintain that same level of community and creative use of space, whether that's a renovation of an office building or a renovation of a school or a warehouse. And again, we don't have a lot of that, but I think that that's just as applicable to what they did as what we could do here. I'll also say that in Portland, what I heard the woman who spoke from Right to Dream say, which I thought was particularly interesting to me, was in that case, they have to move their site. And I heard that she said that the business community actually helped them find another location. In my head, I was thinking, oh, wow, business community wants them out of the business district and put them in another spot. But there was this practical acknowledgement that they wanted to maintain that type of program, and they helped. They didn't just say not here. They helped find another location. And again, I think that spirit of collaboration was there, and I think it really came from a level of practicality about this issue that we all have a role to play. But I did not feel like they were doing a better job on the emergency side of the camping issue in Eugene. They talked about many of the same issues. And I didn't say this before, but what I will also say is the mental health services in Eugene in particular seem, at the very least, the city officials didn't seem to know what they were. So I think, again, we have a greater opportunity here, given some of the resources we have in the community and particularly with mental health partners.
Fantastic. They're great. Greg, I haven't heard from you, so I'm going to just let you jump right ahead of the old line here.
I think, and adding on to what Isabel said, programmatically, a lot of what we saw in both Eugene and Portland were things that we're doing here, but we probably do them inside. And there's a reason we do them inside here, one being the weather and two being just the availability of land. So I think duplicating what they've done there may not be practical here. The takeaway I had, though, or the challenge I had was, how can we do what we do less expensively? Because that's really where these outdoor facilities shine, is that they can do it very inexpensively. And so we may be able not to copy that, but the takeaway for me was, how can we do this in a more efficient way fiscally? And just to correct one thing, the shelter is open in the summer. So
how many does it house?
Up to 90 people.
Pass that to Zan, and then we'll come to Aaron.
Okay. The thing I wanted to maybe just underscore that has been said is, the thing that was really attractive to me about the Eugene rest stops were they were little enclaves of community. They also happen to be outdoors, which appeals to me as somebody who likes to camp. But to me, that trying to capture that piece of it, people were living in camps of 25 people where they self-managed with the help of a nonprofit. So that piece of it because I think you are absolutely right what's being said about we do the same kinds of things here. That sort of scale, which to me reminds me of what some of the churches were doing with trying to let folks camp on site. That had an appeal to it, which I find intriguing, noting that we have the challenges with climate and land. But whether we could do that part of the year, I don't know, on church properties, I don't know. That part of it, the community, was kind of the key thing that really leapt out at me.
Yeah, I was impressed in Eugene at how the city government was really engaged in trying to attack this problem on many different fronts. And the people that we talked to in the city council were very intimately involved. They were working on this hard. You know, the mayor was talking about, you know, listing all the different things they were trying, some things they were hoping to do, some things that weren't working as well. And I was really impressed by that. And you know, I think there were some lessons learned in the positive and negative directions. You know, I think a couple of things they were doing, like they are in a different land situation than we are. So like they allow people to sleep in their cars in designated parking lots around town. And I think partly that's possible because they have a lot of empty parking lots in industrial areas, you know, that we don't have so much of. But there were a couple of real standout things that I took away of things that they were doing that seemed replicable here, potentially, you know, if we could find the right spot for it. But one of them was that they have a good day shelter, and one of the things that they incorporate there is storage space for people's stuff. And, you know, there's a lot of complicated things around homelessness issues that are hard to accomplish, but storage seemed like something that would be a relatively achievable kind of a thing. So I was impressed by that and seemed like something maybe we could tackle. And the other one was the, in particular, the Opportunity Village, the tiny home village, which people have talked about, and in particular that aspect of community that Zan mentioned, that this was not just a way of getting some transitional emergency shelter, but it also provided a form of community there that the folks who lived there, they were self-managed. They clearly took a lot of pride in the project that was going on. And so you couple that with the price point, because it's going to be vastly less on a per unit basis than the permanent housing that we have built and that we need to continue to build. But it seemed like it provided an option on the kind of the spectrum of housing that maybe we could find a spot to do here. That the where problem, that's kind of the where question is kind of the problem, but it had a lot of promise, I thought.
Okay. A couple more thoughts, and then we'll go to right behind you, and then we'll go over here to Ann, and then we want to talk about next steps and where to from here, because this was a good place to go.
Yeah, so I just want to echo Zan's sentiments about the value of that sense of community in those tiny home villages and the homeless encampments, and just the benefit I saw from talking to the people in those communities. You know, I think there's a lot of value in giving space to people who may not fit and just don't, on top of being unhoused, don't fit the existing systems in place and may not be able to transition into them yet. I mean, I've had a lot of feedback that has come up, for me at least in the last 6 to 8 months, was with homeless vets locally, that because of PTSD, they just need that space. They won't go to a shelter because they don't, they can't be that closed in and packed in with so many people. And it would be easy to say, well, you're unhoused and tough luck. And I'm not willing to say that to those people, and I don't think anyone should. There's value in finding innovative solutions to give people space so that they can transition into the existing systems. Another takeaway I had was that they had a fleet of mobile dental and medical buses that I got some pictures of and saw out in the city. And I just thought that was a really cool idea that we could definitely do in Boulder, not only for the unhoused and people who may not be going to shelters, but also to just lower income families and stuff. And maybe that's something we could team up with the county on. I just think that was a cool idea that could scale to this city quite well. Additionally, in the many discussions we had on community engagement, from planning to a lot of things, I felt that on human rights issues and discrimination and unhoused people and people of color in the community and what they have to deal with and what they have to go through, I wish that we could do some kind of community engagement on that, just to make people understand who else is living with them that may not be going door to door and may not even want to talk about the difficulties they have in this community. And what that does is it builds knowledge and consensus on things. And by getting out and doing that now, you don't just wait until you have some idea and some project you want to do. You've laid a foundation in which you've built some consensus, and it gives people an openness to it instead of just, okay, we have an idea, let's go tell people, what's happening to Muslims in this community. I think getting that out, finding ways of getting that out to people now, whether that's, neighborhood liaison, public meetings, I think that's extremely valuable. And as one of two people of color who went on this trip, I took an eye to that type of thing as I went to both cities.
Great.
And it's all kind of outside the box thinking. I will say on those that my stacked boxes comment and height limits, I just think just because you have limits, that doesn't mean you should accept them. I've had limits placed on me just because I'm unapologetically ethnic in my life, and I don't listen to those, and I try to transcend them. So sometimes not accepting, like, hey, we have height limits, let's just have an ugly city. I don't think that should be the thinking. Let's try to push
you can take a whole highway out if you want to. I mean,
maybe I will.
Hi, Ann.
Well, I'd like to see if we can't be a little more flexible and temporary in some of our thinking when it comes to homelessness. I think there are places in the industrial areas of Boulder where we could have a temporary tent shelter kind of experience, and it may be just for 3 months. And sometimes that's a critical thing. I just think we ought to be open to exploring new ideas. The car camping thing, I had never even thought of it. And if you have to be in a designated place, and if there's only one car accepted, they will have a porta potty there. So somebody's paying for that. One of the guys I talked to at Opportunity Village, he was sort of a founder of that, a social worker person, I think. He had started something similar in Ann Arbor. I said, well, how do the people keep warm in Ann Arbor? Because we're worried about them keeping warm here. He said, lots of blankets. Now, if they can do it in Ann Arbor, maybe we should investigate that. But I just think there's nothing wrong with being a little more creative and flexible. And there are parking lots that aren't used at night. There are industrial spaces that might be vacant for a little while. Somebody who's developing a property might be able to not be, breaking ground for 6 months. Why can't we take advantage of that? It's insurance. I mean, there are issues, but anyway.
So a couple more people want to jump in on this, but we haven't gotten to next steps, and technically our meeting ends in 4 minutes. Do you want to move on to next steps, or you want to get through all your thoughts?
I'd like to say one last thing, and that is the mayor of Eugene. How many remember what she said? That everybody has an opinion, and you can both be right. Something, she said it more eloquently. I felt like that was so terribly important, to be respectful and to think, and I look at it in the downtown community, they don't want, in the downtown business district, don't want homeless people. They are right. They are right on one level. They are right on one level because it frightens some people that would normally want to shop there. On the other hand, homeless people want to be there just like we want to be there. So everybody's right.
Okay, thanks, Ann. Okay, so here's the question. Is what now? You went, you learned, you saw great things. You still have more thoughts about the great things that you saw, but you don't even have time to hear because we have so many great things to see. Staff has a work plan, council has a work plan. The question is, how can council and staff support some kind of next steps that bring some of the good from this trip forward into the community? So y'all are prone to really long thoughts. So what I'd like you to do before I come to you is write down your thoughts. I'm looking for something that can be done in 10 words or less. Give me your soundbite suggestions for next steps. We'll start with Mike because he's ready. He knows I like short things. Hit me, Mike.
Okay, we normally study everything to death. We need to stop studying and start doing. We need to look at what we have as a problem and really get on the move. We got to be bold.
Stop studying, start doing. Jennifer.
Define dense transit corridors and allow greater density along those corridors.
Okay. Just pass that mic around.
I think we need to identify a site for a homeless pocket neighborhood and build it.
Identify a site. And I like the words you said, homeless pocket neighborhood. Okay, thank you. Next.
Get some neighborhood greenway bike systems built. And I like Brian's too.
Okay. Next.
Create and foster well-tended relationships between nonprofits and cities to ensure pipelines of funding, support, and other resources. And well-tended is the sort of underlined section there.
Well-tended relationships between nonprofits
and city in terms of funding and other types of resources and support.
Okay, next.
I'd like to see if anyone saw any ideas they liked, especially in the community. Community can step up and do things, and if you make things happen, I think the city is open to getting behind them. You just need someone to be that individual to step up and make that big push to make it happen.
So if the community pushes, the city will follow?
Yes.
Okay.
Along those notes, I'd really like to see the two community representatives who were there, Jennifer and Patty, to perhaps try to do something within your neighborhoods to create the 15-minute neighborhood. And maybe it's just one or two steps that you can get the neighborhood behind, but if we can really get neighborhoods talking, I think that could really help us leverage you guys going on the trip and spending your time there and get some benefit out of it as well.
Next.
I want to take it for 1 second. I really learned the value of nonprofits in terms of being able to work with the city. I'd like to see a lot of the advocates for homeless folks in this town start working towards something that we can bring to the city. I see Chief Testa back there who acknowledged that they were doing some great things in terms of what we called community response teams 2 years ago. So, and Jan Burton came to a meeting recently with us and said, you guys really got to think about nonprofit status. So that's not really something for the city to do, it's for us to do so we can start working with you in a bigger way.
Fantastic.
I think that one of the things that is overlooked is just how much private money we have to bring to the table to fund our current operations. And so I'd like to have a discussion about the financing of all of this and the priorities, because I think it is a private public partnership with nonprofits and the community generally, and then of course city leadership. But I think it's very, very important to look at what we currently have, what is currently paid for, by government, by the public, and just how much effort nonprofits have to put into bringing in private support to even just manage the basics of what we have, which right now is not enough. So I think it's a conversation of what does that look like, and what are the mechanics in place, what are the potential streams of funding, and also how can the city, nonprofits can come with ideas, but I also have seen communities do a really good job around creating a framework and then actually putting out RFPs that generate ideas in a competitive process so that the best ideas can come forward.
Idea competition. Okay, other quick thoughts, suggestions?
We need more bathrooms.
More bathrooms.
Thank you for bringing it up.
All right. Anyone else? Yeah. Brad.
One of the things that really impressed me, particularly in Eugene, was that there was a lot of concern about proper engagement and not starting engagement around a technocratic solution. That engaging the public and the business community by saying, look, we have a lot of expertise here, we've worked out a plan, here it is, what do you like and dislike about it, is not the way to get people bought into a particular piece of policy or a program. You need to first go out and get consensus on what the problem is, and the problem's not going to be the same for each person, as somebody was pointing out, and that through that process there's vestiture, there's ownership of this community issue, and you can have different perspectives represented there. But if you go out with what you think is a very well-formed plan and present it to people, they don't own that.
Tell us the way our plan sucks is not the way to create ownership. Okay. So my question then is for staff, I don't know if it's Jane or Karen or David is, how do we make sure that our great suggestions that don't just die here on the vine, what can we all expect going forward from this conversation? Anyone have a quick thought on that? I know it's on the fly, so if you have a thought, share it, and if not.
There's a lot of information about homelessness that you might...
Sorry.
Karen and I have had numerous conversations about homelessness since the trip, and she has some information to share.
Great.
Whoa.
Sorry.
Behold!
So a couple of things. One is, we've heard pretty loudly and clearly for a while that this is a very complicated issue. There's different levels of understanding about what's actually going on in our community. So one thing we thought that might be helpful to really kind of bring more people up to speed before we move forward with, what our next steps are, is to provide some information, kind of really good summary information about all the things that are going on. Many of you have heard many things for a long period of time through council memos or study sessions or whatnot, but that's all very dense and complicated and serious stuff. So providing information at a much higher level to get that out to everybody. At the same time doing, a tour here in Boulder that everybody could kind of do a look-see like we did in Eugene about what is going on. What is transitional living housing? What does that look like? What is shelter housing? What about Mother House? What did they do for pregnant homeless moms, and where are they? Just a tour and get a lay of the land of the city and the programs and services that are available. Also maybe to incorporate, we talk about vacant industrial land or vacant commercial property, getting a firsthand look at, well, gee, where is that and what does that look like and what are the possibilities there? So doing something similar like we did in Eugene to let everybody kind of develop a common knowledge and understanding along with some easy to digest materials. So we are just in that planning stage, just starting that planning stage, and we can share that. And that, I think, would go a long way in starting this from a common knowledge point of view so that however we move forward, then that could be the basis of information. This information will also be coming forward in an update to council on May 31st in your packet. So that kind of easy to digest information and simple and easy will be coming out in that May 31st packet. And then we'll be in communication with everyone about this tour and how people can participate in the tour so we can get a lay of the land here.
Fantastic. So you're already running away with some great ideas. Thanks, Karen. How about you, David?
Well, I'll invite people to come to Wednesday's comp plan meeting, which is focused actually on defining land use scenarios for analysis in the comprehensive plan. So ideas related to density along transit corridors, gentle infill, et cetera, will be a key part of the conversation on Wednesday. And that input from the community will define scenarios which will then be analyzing in terms of trade-offs between increased transit use, more housing opportunities, decreases in greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera. There's a number of metrics that each scenario will be evaluated upon and then brought forward to council later this year. And our comp plan is a very, very important document. It drives decision making here. So changes to the comp plan result in changes that don't happen next year, but they certainly happen over the next 5 to 10, 20 years. The comp plan's really shaped this community. So I'd encourage people to come to the workshop and give input.
Great.
Which is where and at what time?
It is in the library building, the gallery space and the auditorium, and it's an open house. I believe the open house starts around 3:30, but there's a formal presentation at 5:30 to 6:30, sort of the core, and it's also will be streaming on Channel 8. So if you can't make it, it goes to 7:30. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
Also, there's going to be a further continuation of this conversation on addressing homelessness this Saturday, 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock at First Congregational Church. So everyone is welcome.
Do you want me to expedite typing these notes so you could have them to inform that conversation?
That would be wonderful.
Okay, I'll do that. And so I'll send my notes to Jane. And Jane, will you and your team make sure they get to everyone?
You'll expedite it by sending it to Jane. I got you.
Fantastic.
Making you work.
So, folks, I know you have a lot of things to do with your time. I'm glad you made time for this. It sounds like you have a lot to bring back to the city, and I'm really excited to see what you do with it. Thank you for squeezing it into our weird room and our weird window of time. We really appreciate it. Tabs in there if you're staying for that. Open spaces up there if you're staying for that. Otherwise, go forth and be free and have a lovely evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you.